everyone and welcome to Cisca Stitches. In today's video, I'm going to be showing us how to make this beautiful pencil dress with pleats around the arm and around the side seam of the skirt part of this dress. If you're new to my channel, you're welcome. Kindly click the subscribe button and click the bell so you get updates when I post new videos. And now let's dive into the tutorial. So I have my shoulder line right here, and from here to here is my armhole divided by 2, and mine is 18 divided by 2 is 9 inches, and then I have from my shoulder to my waist I'm using 17.5 inches for mine. So the next thing that we are going to do right now, after drawing the horizontal lines across those points, is to come right here. I'm going to mark my shoulder measurement. Mine is 16 divided by 2 is 8. I'll come right here and do the same thing. I'm going to mark 8. Then I'm going to draw a straight line across. So just like this, very simple. Now once I'm done with this, we're going to mark the bust circumference and the waist circumference. So my bust circumference is 38 divided by 4, that is 9.5. So I'll come right here, mark 9.5. I'm going to be giving a seam allowance of 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to come to my waist area, mark my waist circumference divided by 4. My waist circumference is 33. 33 divided by 4 is 8.25. We're going to be adding that allowance of 1 inch. Alright, and then what we're going to do is to join the bust to the waist. Now, remember I've not added seam allowance, okay? So I'll just come right here. I actually forgot, and add my seam allowance of 1/2 inch, and then join bust to waist. Now, once I'm done with this, I'm going to come right here. We're going to be marking our bust span. Okay, so one measurement I forgot to mark vertically is the shoulder to bust point, and mine is 11 inches. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a straight line across, just like this. And then I'm going to come right at the waist, and at the bust point, we are going to be marking our bust span divided by 2. Bust span is usually your nipple to nipple measurement. So mine is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4 inches. So I mark 4 inches at the bust point and 4 inches at the waist. I'm going to come right here and join the 2 points. And then we're going to be marking the darts. Remember, I gave a 1 inch allowance for my darts, so I'm just going to mark 1/2 inch on both sides. Now you can decide to make your dart allowance to be around 3/4 inches on both sides. That's fine, totaling 1.5 inches. So after marking my dart allowance of 1/2 inch on both sides, I'm just going to come right here and form our triangular darts just like this. And once I'm done with this, I'm going to move to the upper part of this bodice. We're going to be marking the neck width and neck depth. Now this is the front part of the pattern. I'm going to be marking neck width of 4 inches, and I'm going to be going with a neck depth of around 6 inches. So I'll just come right here, mark 6 inches, and then I'm just going to join it like this. Okay, very simple. And then I'm going to be marking the shoulder slope 1 inch as usual, then join this to this, so have our shoulder slants. And what I'm going to do next is to mark the armhole for the front, and in order for me to do that, I'm just going to come right here. I should have 8 inches left. I'm going to mark 4 inches, and then what I'm going to do, come in by 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to connect it like this. Okay, connect from this shoulder area, our new shoulder area, to this 1/2 inch, and then connect that to the bust points, to the bust area, just like this. So the best thing for you to do is to use an armhole curve to curve this out. Now that this is done, all right, remember that I've not added seam allowance to my shoulder slope, to the armhole area, and to the neckline. So what I'm going to do is to cut this out, and to the bottom as well. So I'm going to cut this part out since I've already added seam allowance. Okay, so you can go on to add your seam allowance before cutting. So now that I've cut this part, while cutting the armhole, I'm just going to cut it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, just like this. Cut the shoulder slope with a 1/2 inch seam allowance as well, and the neckline, do the same thing. So it's pretty simple. I also have to do this to the bottom of the dress, so let's not forget that. Sorry, the bottom of the bodice, that's around the waist area. And after cutting this out, what we are going to do next is to move to the back piece of this bodice, which is equally as simple as the front that we have just drafted. So for the back, this is what we're going to do. I have my pattern cut out in two already. So right here is going to be where our zipper allowance will be. I'm just going to place center front right here, making sure that the center front of the front fabric is 1 inch away from the edge of the second fabric, so that we can have our zipper allowance of 1 inch. What I'm going to do next is to measure to confirm that we have our 1 inch, and once that is confirmed, I'm just going to trim this back bodice, just following the shoulder slope and the side seam, as well as the bottom. I'm going to leave my neckline because I want the back neckline to be sort of a little bit higher up. Okay, so let's say I want it higher up by 1 inch or 2 inches. You can go ahead and measure that. So I have around 2 inches here. So I'm just going to cut it like this. So if you know you are not perfect at, just cutting straight on your fabric, just make sure to use a chalk to, mark your measurements. So I'm going to cut my shoulder. Now, when cutting the armhole for the back, I'm not going to go in like I did for the front. Okay, so I'm just going to be cutting it straight, then into this curve. All right, so just like this. I hope you get that explanation. So just like this. So you can see that it is quite simple to draft this. So guys, we have drafted the back and the front of our pattern. Just a minor adjustment that I like to do for bodice and skirts that are joined together. That adjustment is actually done on the back pattern. So I usually just come right at the waist area. Okay, I mark 1/2 inch, and I notice that it doesn't affect the fit of the dress by the time I'm done sewing. So I just mark 1/2 inch, and then what I'm going to do is to just connect that 1/2 inch straight to the top right here, and I'm going to join it together and cut it out. Now, by the time I'm taking my zipper allowance or sewing my zipper onto the fabric, I'll still sew it by 1 inch. What I'm doing right here basically helps to remove zip bulge. Okay, and I'm going to be doing this on the skirt as well, but I'll show you exactly what I'm going to do. So now that I'm done with this, all I need to do is to go on to sew the darts. So it is very, very easy to measure your darts for the back and the front. If you don't want to measure, you can go ahead and do like dart transfer using pins. So just place a pin at your dart points at the top here, at the triangular at the bottom here of the darts. It will come out on your fabric, mark those points and trace it out, or you can go ahead and measure from your center front, just basically draft the darts just like we did here for the other part of your fabric, as well as for the back pattern. Now, when drafting the back darts pattern, you need to take into consideration the 1/2 inch that you cut away from the bottom, so that it doesn't affect the shape of the darts. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and do that and then sew my darts up. So after sewing my darts on the bodice pieces, the next thing that I'm going to do is to place them right sides touching, and then I will go on to sew the shoulder seams as well as the side seam. So after sewing the side seam and the shoulder slope of the bodice, I'm going to go ahead and conceal the raw edge of my neckline with a bias tape. and then we're going to move on to the skirt part of this dress. So for the skirt part, I have my fabric folded into two right here, and we're starting with the front piece. Now what I've done is to mark my waist to hip and then my waist to knee. So my full length is 41.5 inches and my shoulder to waist is 17.5. So what I did was to just place 17.5 right here at the waist area, and you can see that I have 26 right here and I have 41.5 inches at the bottom. Now what I'm going to do next is to mark my waist circumference divided by 4, and for that it is 8.25 inches because my waist circumference is 33 inches. Now I'm not going to be adding that to the skirt part of this dress because I don't want to, but that is optional. So my hip is 42 inches. So I'm going to come right here, divide that by 4, and that should give us 10.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 10.5 inches right here. All right. I'm adding seam allowance, half an inch. I didn't do that for my waist, so I'll come right here and do that. Now, the total measurement around my hip should be 11 inches. Okay, so if I should remove 1.5 from that, that will give me 9.5. And that is what I'm going to be measuring around the bottom of this dress. 9.5 inclusive of seam allowance. Okay, so I'll come right here and mark 9.5. And what I'm going to do next is to join my waist to hip and then join my hip to the bottom of the skirt. Now once we are done with this, we are going to do a little bit of shaping because the hip area is not very sharp. Now I know that I do not have a prominent hip, and in order for me to get rid of the excess around that point, around the hip area, I will have to use a curved ruler for that. I'll be using this for mine so that I can have it really shaped out. And I noticed that by the time I do this, no matter what is taken out here, the hip area is actually quite fitting. So I'm just going to shapen it out just like this. Very, very simple. Remember that I've added my seam allowance to this pattern, okay? So I'll just shapen it out. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut the top part with a half an inch seam allowance, cut the bottom with a half an inch seam allowance. So after cutting the front part of the skirt, this is what I have. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is to place that front part on top of 2 pieces of fabric in order for us to work on the back piece. So I've placed the front on top of the back with a 1-inch zipper allowance. Now what I'm going to do next is to just cut out the back pattern, following the front or using the front as a guide. So you can see that drafting the skirt part is quite simple. It's a simplistic process, but we're still going to do sort of like a bit of shaping around the zipper allowance area so that we can have it sitting pretty at our center back. So remember that we did something slanty at the bodice area. In order for it to match around the waist for the back, we're going to repeat the same thing. So the first thing that we're going to do is to mark the waist to hip. Okay, so using my front as a guide, that is very, very simple. I'm just going to come right here, extend the line I have on the front to the back, just like this, okay? And then I'm going to come up at the waist area, mark half an inch. Connect this point to the hip area and we are going to cut it out. And that's exactly what we have for the shaping of the skirt parts. Like I said, it usually works for me. So this type of shaping is better to do a mock trial on maybe muslin fabric to see if it works for you, because so far it has been working for me, and that is why I decided to share this process with us. So I'll go ahead and cut this out. So after cutting out the skirt pieces for both front and back, I'm going to keep this aside and we're going to work on the pleats for the dress that we are making. So for the pleated part of this dress, the skirt part actually, I cut the fabric piece to about twice the length of the skirt. Okay, so you can see that the fabric is actually on fold. I folded it right here, and this is my skirt piece. This is the length. So we have about twice the length of our skirt piece, and the width is actually 7 inches. We're going to fold the piece with right sides touching, and then I'm going to go on to sew this end by a half an inch and sew this other end by a half an inch. Of course, we are going to need 2 pieces of this because we are going to put it at the side seam of the skirt area, and this is what I have. Now, for the armhole part, you actually need to measure the armhole of your bodice. Go ahead and measure your armhole round. Okay, make sure to add seam allowance when you're cutting the length of the fabric piece. So I have about twice my armhole round, and the width of the armhole part is measuring 6 inches. I'll do the same steps as I explained for the fabric around the skirt parts. Fold it right sides touching, sew here by half an inch, sew here by half an inch. So after sewing the pieces up at the ends, at both ends, what I'm going to do is to turn it right sides out, and I'm going to give this a very, very good press and stitch this open end. I'm just going to stitch it down by a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do it for the armhole pieces and the side seam pieces. So after pressing and stitching everything down, the next thing that I'm going to do is to create random pleats on the fabric. So I'm going to be pleating this, like I said, to the circumference of my armhole and to the length of the skirt part. But of course, I need to take into consideration my seam allowance at the top and at the bottom. So what I'm going to do right now is to just do random pleats on my fabric to my armhole circumference. Okay, so just random pleats. So I'm basically just creating little knife pleats. So I'm going with knife pleats for this tutorial. So after pleating, this is what I have. What I'm going to do is to go ahead and stitch on the pleats so that I hold it down, and I'll repeat the same thing for the other pieces of fabric that needs to be pleated. So after doing the pleats and sewing them together, this is what I have. Okay, so what I've done was to take one of the armhole pleats and I placed it around the armhole. What we are going to do is to go ahead and sew this by a half an inch or a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I need to make sure that the direction of the pleats is the same on both sides. Okay, so this is sort of like going to form like a false sleeve, as you can see. I'm going to repeat the same thing for the other armhole. Okay, and now for the skirt part, what I'm going to do is to place, sort of like sandwich the pleats in between the side seam of the front and back pattern. So I'm going to place this half an inch below the waist because we have a half an inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm just going to place it like that, and we are going to peg that area down. So after pegging it down, this is what I have. I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and we're going to be sewing this by a half an inch seam allowance from top to bottom, making sure that this pleated fabric is sandwiched in between. So by the time I sew it like this and we turn it, we'll have the pleats, you know, showing on the side. Okay, so you need to make sure that the direction on the front part of your dress is the same on both sides. So after sewing the pleats onto the skirt, this is what we have. And right here is the bodice. I have sewn it onto the armhole area and overlocked the edges. Just a quick should I say correction, the fabric I used for the armhole part is just 1.5 times the circumference of the armhole. Okay, it's not 2 times like I did for the side seam at the skirt part. So you will notice that the pleats here are a lot closer and fuller compared to the pleats at the sleeve, but that's okay. So what we want to do next is to join the bodice and the skirt together, and I'm just going to place them on top of each other with right sides touching, and we are going to sew by a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here is the waist area. We're going to be matching the waist to the waist and ensuring that the side seam matches as well. That is very, very important. Okay, so once we have, ensure that the side seam is matching, we're just going to go ahead and stitch the entire waistline up by a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So after joining the bodice and the skirt part of this dress together, this is what we have. Now what we are going to do is to fix in our zipper. So I'm going to grab my zipper now, and I'm going to place the right side of the zipper to the right side of this part of my fabric. I'm going to go ahead and sew this up by my seam allowance. Okay, so when I get to where I want the zipper to stop, which is usually around my hip area, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same thing at the other side. Okay, make sure I place right side of my zipper touching right side of the fabric around the zip allowance area, and sew all the way down. Then I'll explain to us what we are going to do next to finish up our dress. So after sewing on the zipper, this is what I have. I'll go ahead and sew this part in so that it is hidden. Okay, what we want to do now is to sew the rest of this part of the dress. What I usually do is I sew from where the stitch around the zipper ends, and I stop somewhere about 5 inches above the bottom, so that I have like a slit right here for easy movement. So that is what I usually do for mine. And I go on to conceal the raw edges with an overlock stitch. If you don't have an overlock stitch, you can use a zigzag stitch. For the bottom of the dress, I'm going to be using a bias tip to turn it because I don't want it shorter, way shorter than it is. Okay, so this is what I said I usually do around the zipper. I just place it like this, and then I'm going to go on to sew, from where the stitch ends, like I said, following my zipper allowance measurement up until where I want it to end, so that I have my slits. And when I'm done, I'll come show you guys what our dress looks like.